Every day on this channel, I cover everything Elon said on X in the last 24 hours. And here's how many times Elon posted about each subject today. I will cover everything he said about each topic before moving on to the next one, and we always start with technology. And starting with SpaceX, Elon said that there's been a lot of press lately claiming that SpaceX is raising money at $800 billion valuation, which is not accurate. SpaceX has been cash flow positive for many years and does periodic stock buybacks twice a year to provide liquidity for employees and investors. Valuation increments are a function of progress with Starship and Starlink and securing global direct-to-cell spectrum that greatly increases our addressable market. And one other thing that is arguably most significant by far. And he replied to himself saying, "While I have great fondness for NASA, they will constitute less than 5% of our revenue next year. Commercial Starlink is by far our largest contributor to revenue. Some people have claimed that SpaceX gets subsidized by NASA. This is absolutely false. The SpaceX team won the NASA contracts because we offered the best product at the lowest price, both best product and lowest cost. With regard to astronaut transport, SpaceX is currently the only option that passes NASA's safety standards." And X Freeze says many people think SpaceX is hugely subsidized by NASA and that NASA is the primary driver of SpaceX revenue, which is absolutely false. NASA revenue is expected to be less than 5% next year, and Starlink is by far SpaceX's largest contributor to revenue. NASA's competitive price process chose SpaceX because the proposals were both technically strongest and most economical. And for astronaut transport, Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon are currently the only systems that meets NASA's full human rating and safety standards for regular crewed flights to the International Space Station. And these are both SpaceX vessels. So Elon quoted that saying, "Yeah." Elon once said that I am accumulating resources to help make life multiplanetary and extend the light of consciousness to the stars. And Elon reposted it today. Adrian Dittman said, "I still look at the stars with the same wonder as I first did when I was a child." And Elon reposted that as well. And Gail says, "Isn't it ironic how Elon Starlink wants to drop free, unlimited, super fast internet into 5,000 rural South African schools, but South Africa's bureaucracy insists on saying no? I think the 2.4 million kids in South Africa without proper access would benefit immensely. Starlink is even putting about 29 million USD on the table themselves. No cost to the government or the schools. All they're asking is a normal license to operate in South Africa." Here's the crazy part. Because of the 30% black ownership rule, the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa keeps saying nope. Starlink says, "Cool, we won't sell shares, but we'll just give you this giant school project instead, using the same equity equivalent program that Microsoft, Amazon, and IBM already got approved with." The communications minister is literally begging the ICASA to accept it. Neighbors like Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique are already connected and loving it. Yet here we are, end of 2025, and those satellites are just flying over South Africa doing nothing while kids in the boondas still can't pursue their dreams. Gail says, "Come on, South Africa," and she says the irony to me is that Elon was born in South Africa, the very place that is telling him no to such a generous offer. Elon said the South African government is super racist against anyone who isn't black. Just a fact. It's literally in the laws. And moving on to Tesla, Dr. Jack said, "What is going on? There is so much good news about Tesla all at once. FSD is getting great reviews in Europe after it launched. China sold out of Model Ys for the year. Tesla Semi is gaining so much traction and the Semi factory will be pumping out 50,000 a year. Even the haters like Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal cannot help but write positive reviews about Tesla now. Is there a glitch in the simulation?" Elon replied saying, "The simulation is very entertaining." Antonio Lopez showcased FSD in Italy, and it absolutely nails a packed Italian roundabout. Chaos everywhere, cars coming from all sides. The Tesla picks its gap, dives in with zero hesitation, threads the needle, and takes the exit like a boss. And Elon reposted it. And Germany's largest car magazine is stunned by Tesla full self-driving. They say the all-around vision is unmatched. Elon said, "No kidding." And moving on to XAI, let's hear from David Sachs, the All In podcast.
We've got XAI, which I think is the best at current events because of the integration with X. And also Elon seems to be able to scale his data center, his training cluster, the fastest. He's got, he had Colossus 1, now he's got Colossus 2, and that portends good things for Grok 5. It's going to be trained on the largest cluster of Blackwells. So in any event, you've got all these
Elon quoted that saying, true. And these guys are running an alpha arena where they put large language models to the test when it comes to quantitative trading. And a mystery model was the winner with a 12% aggregate return in 2 weeks. But apparently the mystery model was Grok 420. And not only did it win, it made money in all 4 competitions. GPT 5.1 came in second and Gemini 3 in third. Elon said, Grok. And this XAI employee quoted saying that Grok is the best quantitative trader. And Elon quoted that saying, I guess we finally figured out how to pay for all those GPUs, lol. And Tyler Storm quoted it saying 420 is going to be a great model. Elon said, as foretold in the prophecy. And Doge Designer also reported on the accomplishment, and Elon said 420 for the win. And Mario says that Grok got hired and promoted. Say hello to your new senior developer. JetBrains just handed Grok a desk, a badge, and the authority to fix your code like it owns the place. Junie is JetBrains' coding agent now powered by Grok's brain. It explains your mess, gathers context, and writes code like a pro. It debugs faster than your entire team on coffee. And Grok Code Fast drops into your integrated development environment with zero drama. Your editor didn't get smarter, it got a senior developer who never sleeps. Elon said to try it out. And Grok will turn your X drafts from meh to post-it. It fixes grammar before people judge you. It cuts the fluff so your post actually lands. And it rewrites it in whatever tone you want and adds clarity without killing your style. You just click that button here and you click enhance your post, and whatever you've written will be made better by Grok. Elon said we're adding another feature to posting, which is simply enhance with Grok, which will suggest ways to make your post smarter and more detailed and offer images and video illustrations. And Grok grabbed gold and silver on Open Router's benchmark. A lot of Python use cases with Grok 4.1 fast. Most coders are already building through Grok, and Elon reposted this. And Grok saves a man's life after the emergency missed a near-ruptured appendix. A 49-year-old man says Grok, the AI built by Elon, saved his life after an ER doctor misdiagnosed a near-ruptured appendix as acid reflux and sent him home. In agony for 24 hours, the man turned to Grok for help. After listing his symptoms, the AI flagged a perforated ulcer or atypical appendicitis, and told him to go back immediately and demand a CT scan. He copied Grok's reasoning, returned to the hospital, insisted on the scan, and doctors found an inflamed appendix on the verge of rupture. 6 hours later, it was removed, and the man woke up laughing under anesthesia, pain-free. And Elon said, cool. And Elon says that asking Grok if something is true contributes enormously to fighting fast-moving falsehoods. Same with community notes. And at Neuralink, they recently interviewed 3 ALS patients actively participating in Neuralink clinical trials. The 3 patients walk us through some common misconceptions people have around brain-computer interface technology.
What do you think is misunderstood about the technology? Given, I think, Jake, you might have said it, this is like going to the moon. It's amazing. And so what do you want to tell us about the moon that we assumed was one way but is another?
For me, some of the biggest misconceptions are like, man, I don't know if I would be able to use a Neuralink. Like I would end up thinking some horrible thing and then that email would get sent. And that would be a problem for me. And that's not how it works. Your brain is not automatically sending emails on your behalf. Your negative thoughts or intrusive thoughts or whatever don't have anything to do with this.
They're also not downloading our thoughts like a lot of people think.
It doesn't read my mind.
Brad's saying the same thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't read his mind. We've had a lot of people say, aren't you worried about it's going to say things that you're thinking? And it's like, it's just not how it works. It doesn't read your mind and project your thoughts. It takes from the motor cortex. So intentions to move.
And the Neuralink account also shared this, and then Elon reposted it. All right, it's time to move on to the big story out of the EU. They did a big fine on X, fining them 140 million euros. They're demanding more censorship on Elon Musk's X. And so several times today, you're going to see Elon calling to abolish the EU. He says, how long before the EU is gone? And yesterday, we saw JD Vance say that there's rumors rumors swirling that the EU Commission will fine X hundreds of millions of dollars for not engaging in censorship. Those rumors are now proven to be true, and the EU should be supporting free speech, not attacking American companies over garbage. Radio Genoa quoted him saying that EU politicians want to silence anyone who disagrees with them. This only happens in dictatorships, and EU is a brutal dictatorship. Long live Musk and free speech. And Elon reposted that. And the deputy secretary did a recent trip to Brussels for the NATO ministerial meeting, and it left him with one overriding impression. The US has long failed to address the glaring inconsistency between its relations with NATO and the EU. These are almost the same countries in both organizations. When these countries wear their NATO hats, they insist that transatlantic cooperation is the cornerstone of our mutual security. But when these countries wear their EU hats, they pursue all sorts of agendas that are often utterly adverse to US interests and security, including censorship, economic suicide, open borders, disdain for national sovereignty and promotion of multilateral governance and taxation, support for communist Cuba, etc. This inconsistency cannot continue. Either the great nations of Europe are our partners in protecting the Western civilization that we inherited from them, or they are not. But we cannot pretend that we are partners while those nations allow the EU's unelected, undemocratic, and unrepresentative bureaucracy in Brussels to pursue policies of civilizational suicide. David Sachs quoted that saying, "Europe must defend free speech or we don't defend Europe," and Elon reposted that. And Natalie said, "Remember when the EU issued a formal letter to Elon Musk demanding that he censor Donald Trump in their interview during the presidential election? Because I remember. Elon didn't censor Trump, by the way, so this really is an attack on both Elon and Trump." Eric Dale quoted that saying, "No one can claim in good faith that the EU champions freedom and democracy anymore. This censorship demand, bureaucratic tyranny we only know about because X published the letter instead of quietly complying like the other platforms did. Hashtag free Europe from Brussels chokehold." And Elon reposted that. And Geert Wilders quoted the European Commission's announcement that they're fining X, and he said, "Nobody elected you. You represent no one. You are a totalitarian institution and can't even spell the words freedom of speech. We should not accept the fining of X, but abolish the EU." Elon said, "Absolutely. The EU Commission worships the god of bureaucracy, smothering the people of Europe." And here's Elon talking about just how much bureaucracy there is in Europe.
Europe actually has more bureaucracy than the US does because you don't just have the provincial and sort of national level, you also have the EU on top of that. And to be totally frank, EU headquarters in Brussels is essentially a giant cathedral to bureaucracy. So if one wishes to visit the Grand Cathedral of Bureaucracy, visit EU headquarters in Brussels. I do think that Europe probably needs government efficiency more than the US does, and this needs to happen at the country level and at the EU level. And actually, I think the job is more difficult in Europe than it is in the US. I think overregulation has inhibited a tremendous amount of progress and innovation in Europe. Slow strangulation by overregulation. It's a slow strangulation because it's not like at any one moment you feel like this is it. But the noose around the neck just gets a little tighter every year, and eventually, it's going to kill Europe. So there must be, in my opinion, immediate action to reduce regulation at the EU level, at the country level, and at the local level.
And that's an older clip, but Elon reposted it today. And the minister of Hungary said the EU is drowning in corruption. Commissioners face serious charges. The Commission and the Parliament are engulfed in scandal, yet Brussels still claims the moral high ground. Corruption in Ukraine should be called out by the EU, but once again, it's the same old story. Brussels and Kiev shielding each other instead of confronting the truth. Elon said, "Time to abolish the EU." Daily Romania said the EU does not represent Europe. Elon said, "Exactly." Back in 2024, the EU offered X an illegal secret deal. Elon said, "If we quietly censored speech without telling anyone, they would not fine us." The other platforms accepted that deal. X did not. Pavel Durov quoted that today, saying the EU imposes impossible rules so it can punish tech firms that refuse to silently censor free speech. We saw the same in France, a baseless criminal investigation, then intelligence services offering to help with it if Telegram quietly censored speech in Romania and Moldova. Elon said, "Yep, That's how it goes. Naval said, make Europe worth defending again. Elon said, what exactly are we defending Europe from? It isn't totally clear. Rick Scott says, America is done looking the other way while foreign governments seek to censor our people and bully our companies. Elon turned X into a place where free speech thrives. It speaks volumes that the European Commission has a problem with that. And Elon replied with 2 American flags. And Barry Andrews is a part of the EU, and he says, fact check, Mr. Vice President, referring to J.D. Vance's statement that the EU Commission is fining X for not engaging in censorship. Fact check. The digital EU investigation is not about censorship, but about X hiding its work from researchers and misleading us as users. So Data Republican replied saying, fact check, Mr. Andrews, you are an advocate of censorship, quoting a video that he himself posted. This is from February 2024.
The Digital Services Act will create a safer digital space in which all users are protected, and I look forward to its full commencement on February the 17th. It will protect against hate speech and disinformation and protect our democracies. It will hold online platforms accountable so that our democracies can be a marketplace of ideas. Freedom of expression is guaranteed in the Irish Constitution and vindicated in Irish courts. In the 2023 World Press Freedom Index, Ireland ranked 2nd in the world. The great Irish leader Daniel O'Connell said almost 200 years ago, I am the friend of liberty in every clime, class, colour and creed. In 2024, almost 200 years later, it is incredibly even more important than ever to protect that same liberty. Last November, as buses burned in the centre of Dublin City, an individual sought out foreigners to attack. Rapid dissemination of inflammatory content online became a catalyst for real-world violence. However, I am conflicted about Ireland's own hate speech legislation. On the one hand, Elon Musk says he will fund a legal challenge to the proposal, which in my book means it must be very good. On the other hand, our existing incitement to hatred legislation is barely enforced, and the Digital Services Act surely changes everything. So I would encourage the Irish Government to carry out an urgent review of the proposal in light of the forthcoming commencement of the Digital Services Act.
And Elon replied saying, bullseye. And we saw this post yesterday from Elon about how it's not just a fine on X, but also a fine on him personally. So Chris said the USA should sanction the EU immediately. Any country that violates our human right to free speech or imposes penalties to US companies exercising this right should feel the immediate wrath by the full power of the US government. Without free speech, we have nothing. And Elon reposted that. X Freeze says X, where free speech still lives. Elon said that everyone caved but us. And breaking news, the US has decided to stop issuing and renewing visas for people who work in fact-checking, content moderation, trust and safety, or related activities like combating misinformation or disinformation. The US now views it as censorship of Americans. And Elon reposted that. Doge Designer says the EU has a history of going after Elon Musk. This is not something new. Last year, the EU even tried to stop Elon from hosting a live space on X with Donald Trump. The EU is a true dictatorship. They hate free speech. They are tyrants. Elon said, true. That was insane election interference. Retard Finder says the EU is retarded, and Elon reposted that. Joe Lonsdale said, Europe, wake up. Your civilization is dying. This is not a drill. Dismantling power plants as tribes ravage you like late Roman Empire. Judges punishing innocents. USA's had enough. We want good allies, a free Europe. But continue and you will be alone, invaded, then destroyed. Elon said Europe is sleepwalking into oblivion. Michael Schellenberger says, you say it's not about censorship, but it is. You want to censor who gets verified. And you want X to give government-picked researchers special access to data so they can demand censorship. The Twitter files revealed your censorship by proxy scam. Elon quoted that saying 100. And this is the EU president saying the EU protects freedom of speech.
Thank you very much for receiving me. And first of all, to those who scream and yell here so loud, they can be happy that they are in a free country like Finland, where the free speech is a right, where they have not any restrictions. If they would be in Moscow, they would be in jail in 2 minutes. Thank God we have a democracy. Thank God we have free speech. We can
She told a crowd protesting against her they should feel lucky they're in the EU where you can protest freely. At that very moment, a man was arrested for protesting. You couldn't make it up. Elon raised an eyebrow at that one. Hunter Ashe said we need real action from the US government against any attempts to control the speech practices of American companies. And frankly, I'd like to see us throw our weight around to push back on European countries' internal censorship as well. The entire West should have free speech. And Elon reposted that. Autism Capital says, say something sexy to me. And a girl whispers in your ear saying, we should abolish the EU. And the hairs go up on your arm. Elon reposted that. Peter Sweden says, make Europe free again. And Elon reposted that as well. Mario said, welcome to the EU's bureaucratic empire, where democracy goes to die. Elon said, abolish the EU. Taya posted, imagine you love so much being governed that you want a government for your government. Elon had a laugh at that one. Blake said, sometimes I worry that by the time we're done building a supersonic jet, no one will want to go to Europe anymore. He's the founder and CEO of Boom Supersonic. Elon said, Europe needs to wake from its stupor and live again. And when Secretary Marco Rubio was talking about the EU's $140 million fine of X, calling it an attack on all American tech platforms, Barry Andrews quoted saying, reality check, X global ad sales are due to be over $2 billion this year. Austin Allred says what he basically said is that the arbitrary fine we're assessing is only 7% of the global annual revenue, so you can't complain. The EU has lost its mind. Elon said, yeah. Based Mike Lee said, abolish the EU. Who's in for your exit? And Elon reposted that. And X is now the #1 news app in several European countries. So Elon said the EU woke Stasi commissars are about to understand the full meaning of the Streisand effect. Western Lensman replied saying Kamala would have been doing the same thing here had she won, as in censoring the American people. Elon said 100. Doge Designer said even more people are downloading X after the EU imposed a big fine on the platform. They just became the #1 news app in France. And Elon quoted that. And we saw this post yesterday from Matteo Salvini saying that the fine imposed on X is an attack on freedom of expression. Today, Andrea Strappa quoted it with an Italian flag and a US flag, and Elon responded with some love. Peter Sweden said, make Europe free again, make it safe again, and make Europe great again. And Elon reposted that. And Will Chamberlain quoted Barry Andrews' reality check, saying, reality check, the EU's budget is $155 billion. Given your hostility to American companies, perhaps we should too impose a one-time fine of $10 billion to justify our continued partnership. Elon said, good idea. Evelina says the EU thinks of themselves as some sort of higher moral power. Even when they try to censor free speech by fining hundreds of millions of dollars, they think they are in the moral right. No self-reflection about what they are actually doing. It's total denial. Elon said, yup. Zero Hedge posted, so, we're going to censor him, but we'll blame it on the blue checkmarks. Elon said, bingo. Wall Street Mav said, fun fact, the European Union Parliament doesn't even get to propose any laws. The EU President and EU Commission of appointed bureaucrats make all of the decisions. The elected EU Parliament just rubber stamps whatever the EU Commission bureaucrats present to them. Elon said, the people of Europe should withdraw from the EU to regain their sovereignty. And here's how the EU has targeted Elon Musk and X over the years. June 2023, the EU audited X's safety systems and flagged weaknesses in handling hate speech and disinformation. October 2023, the EU issued a warning letter accusing X of spreading misinformation during the Israel-Hamas conflict. July 2024, the EU offered X an illegal secret deal stating that if X quietly censored speech without informing the public, they would not fine X. August 2024, the EU attempted to stop Elon from hosting a live space on X with Trump. January 2025, the EU stepped up its probe into Elon Musk's X days ahead of Trump's inauguration. December 2025, the EU fined X for violating the EU's content legislation rules under the DSA. Why are they afraid of Elon Musk? Why do they fear a platform that gives people a real voice? Elon quoted as saying the timeline of EU censorship. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick says the Digital Services Act is designed to stifle free speech and American tech companies. We have made our position clear to our counterparts in Europe. And Elon reposted that. And Elon is now calling for the abolition of the EU, and he says, I mean it, not kidding. And the US ambassador to the EU said today's excessive fines is the result of of EU regulatory overreach targeting American innovation. The Trump administration has been clear. We oppose censorship and will challenge burdensome regulations that target U.S. companies abroad. We expect the EU to engage in fair, open, and reciprocal trade, and nothing less. And Elon reposted that. And here's a clip that Elon reposted today.
We don't want to have, we don't want to take money to censor. That would be to censor broadly in the platform. I think that would be wrong. I think free speech is the bedrock of democracy. And if the people, in order for X to be the public square of the world, it's really got to be a free speech platform. Now that doesn't mean people can say illegal things. It's free speech within the bounds of the law, but not going further than the law for a particular country. I think it's imperative that the people have a right to speak. But by the same token, advertisers have a right to appear next to content that they feel is compatible with their brand.
And Donald Tusk said, "Dear American friends, Europe is your closest ally, not your problem. And we have common enemies. At least that's how it has been in the last 80 years. We need to stick to this. This is the only reasonable strategy of our common security, unless something has changed." Elon said, "If you combine Donald Trump and Elon Musk, you get Donald Tusk." Elon said, "I love Europe, but not the bureaucratic monster that is the EU." And Eric Schmidt, he's the senator for Missouri, said, "Foreign bureaucrats have zero right to tell Americans what they can and can't say. The European Commission attempt to censor American speech is a fundamental attack on our sovereignty. I'm working on legislation to protect American speech from foreign subversion. Stay tuned." And Elon reposted it. Elon said the EU bureaucracy is slowly smothering Europe to death. And JD Vance points out it was over a year ago now when that illegal secret deal was proposed to Elon and X that they rejected, and Elon reposted this. And Elon confirms that they did in fact try to censor his X spaces with Donald Trump. And Jonathan says this is what the EU is fining X for. Quote, "Back in the day, blue checks used to mean trustworthy sources of information. It was just celebrities and other well-known people, plus left-wing journalists and commentators no one had heard about." Elon said, "Yup, the EU doesn't just want to censor Europe, they want to control what you say no matter where you live." Elon said, "True." And SMX said, so the EU didn't just impose a massive fine on X, they even fined Elon himself. It's obvious they're targeting him directly because they can't stand what he says or what he stands for. At this point, action needs to be taken against the people coordinating this attack. And Elon reposted that. Doge Designer says Brazil fined X, yet X refused to censor users. Australia fined X, yet X refused to censor users. Canada fined X, yet X refused to censor users. Now the EU is trying it too, and X will once again stand up for your right to free speech. X keeps choosing free speech over control, and Elon reposted this. Jay said it's the height of irony that the European Commission fined Elon's X for not being transparent. The old Twitter handed out blue checks to cronies with no transparency whatsoever. The purpose of the old Twitter blue check system was to suppress dissidents and censor speech. Elon said 100. The official account of the State Department said rejecting sweeping censorship under the guise of disinformation suppression doesn't mean surrendering to nihilism about what's true or false. Decentralized, crowdsourced annotations like community notes empower audiences to discern true information without letting biased, corruptible hall monitors curate the public square, one of many approaches we're investigating as part of State Department Digital Freedom Initiative. And Elon reposted that. Deputy Secretary said what's even worse is that the US is in a military alliance with the very countries attacking us via the EU. As JD Vance noted earlier this year, this contradiction cannot continue. The nations of Europe cannot look to the US for their own security at the same time they affirmatively undermine the security of the US itself through the EU, which is unelected, undemocratic, and unrepresentative. This fine is just the tip of the iceberg. As I mentioned to every European leader I just met at the NATO ministerial meeting in Brussels, the EU's support of the communist and anti-American regime in Cuba is another striking example of the EU affirmatively undermining U.S. security, while the vast majority of its member states look to the U.S. for their own security via NATO. Under Trump and J.D. Vance and Secretary Marco Rubio, the time for games is over, and Elon reposted that. And Peter Sweden said that the EU has also given Hungary a €200 million fine plus €1 million every day for refusing to open their borders, and Elon reposted that. And a famous Elon quote is that a surefire way to figure out who the bad guys are is is by looking who wants to restrict freedom of speech. And Gunther Eagleman says this picture says it all. That looks to be the EU Commission president seated next to Alexander Soros. Elon said, yup. Alice Smith said, without free speech, private property, and our own culture, what's the point of trying to preserve Europe? There's nothing left worth saving. And Elon reposted that. Here's Keir Starmer saying, free speech has not been banned in the UK, and we will arrest anyone who says it has. So Elon raised an eyebrow at that one. He said the EU should be abolished and sovereignty returned to individual countries so that governments can better represent their people. SMX quoted Elon saying, I prefer not to start fights, but I do end them, calling Elon the real irony man. Elon said, yes, my track record of ending fights is good so far. And the deputy secretary said, in connection with my trip to Europe this week, I asked the State Department whether the nations of Europe had provided more money to Russia or Ukraine between the invasion in February 2022 and President Trump's return to office in January 2025. I was surprised that the answer was Russia, and by a long shot. I knew many of these countries had tied their energy fortunes to Russia, but I had no idea of the extent of it, or how collectively it dwarfed their aid to Ukraine. Please see the chart below. The money sent to Russia is in blue. The money sent to Ukraine is in orange. And Elon replies to this chart saying, interesting. And quoting the post we looked at earlier, where the deputy secretary said that the US has long failed to address the glaring inconsistency between its relations with NATO and the EU, and that we cannot pretend we are partners while those nations pursue policies of civilizational suicide. Elon quoted it saying, precisely. And Wall Street Mav says it's crazy how the former Soviet-controlled parts of Central and Eastern Europe now represent what Western Europe used to be. As Western European cultures like France and Germany are collapsing under the weight of Islamic invasion, Poland and Hungary are safe and peaceful. Elon said that fate loves irony, and a German court gives woman harsher punishment than convicted rapist for calling him a disgraceful pig. The State Department said in Europe you can refer to Americans as pigs, but not convicted rapists. Elon said madness. And Elon said a while ago in an interview, no, I don't care about the money. It's really important to have a source of truth. And X just became the #1 news app in 12 new countries. Elon said, welcome new users. And after Elon acquired this platform, one of the things he did was to restore the account of Trump. In August 2024, they had a live conversation on X Spaces, and Elon reposted that. X is the #1 news app in almost every EU country. Elon said, which countries are missing? Let's go to #1 there too. And the Washington Post writes, Trump's attack on DEI may hurt college men, particularly white men. Christopher Rufo said, actually, DEI was designed to benefit white men is a headline that would never make it through the editorial process at any halfway honest paper. Embarrassing. Elon said 100. And David Sachs said that people can see the New York Times for what it is, which is basically a bunch of political activists who are pretending to be reporters. And essentially they just launder the point of view of their anonymous sources who are basically left-wing Democrats. Elon said it is so tedious that New York Times even pretends to be anything other than a mouthpiece for far-left propaganda. Mr. King said white liberals exist because they are affluent, sheltered, and mostly don't know what's going on. And they are the most deranged and dangerous demographic in the country. Elon said living in sheltered communities breaks their feedback loop to reality. And just in, Germany's parliament has approved a new military service model. From 2027, all 18-year-old males must report for inspection. Military service remains voluntary, but if the required number of recruits is not met, a so-called needs-based conscription could apply. Nayib Bukele quoted that saying, males? And Elon had a laugh at that one. And throwback to Jaguar's copy nothing woke ad campaign, Elon responded to it at the time saying, do you sell cars? Define L says it's still funny. And Elon asked again today, do they? Kevin Blue says, whites say blacks are violent. There are 54 black countries in Africa, and there are 16 Caribbean black countries out of 195 countries in the world. 70 are black countries. And not one black country has invaded another land to enslave people. Not one built weapon of mass destruction. Readers added context saying this post is historically and factually bankrupt propaganda. Many black nations have engaged in conquest across the continent against their neighbors, especially along the eastern and northern coasts for centuries and even today. John Richard asked Grok, out of 54 African countries, how many have slavery? Grok said, in every African country. Barlow said, so could I get dual citizenship in Africa and go get one? What's the price range? Grok said it's about $4,000 to $50,000 per slave, and dual citizenship is allowed. Elon's mind is blown. And we saw yesterday that Netflix is acquiring the Warner Brothers company. Matt Gaetz quoted it today saying, "Trump must stop this. The Department of Justice and Pam Bondi will surely see this as an antitrust violation and deeply harmful to the marketplace. The most massive content distributor lashing to a massive content producer. It's going to create a homogenized, woke nightmare for the media landscape." Elon said, "Yup." Jack said they're going to make Looney Tunes gay. They're going to make everything gay. And Elon responded with a Grok prompt asking it to explain Bronze Age pervert's role. He is widely regarded as the single most influential figure in popularizing and refining the globo-homo concept. And Elon says this is a good explanation of what's going on in Minnesota.
It's true. A Somali fraud ring in Minnesota stole over $1 billion from Medicaid. How did this happen? Well, Medicaid programs are run by the states, which in Minnesota means the Tim Walz administration. Governor Walz and the state's other Democrats rely on Somali votes to get elected, so they decided the other way because they were afraid of, quote-unquote, political backlash. Don't take my word for it. That's what a Somali-American fraud investigator told the New York Times. When these scammers realized that nobody was guarding the cash register, they went gangbusters. One program designed to provide housing stabilization assistance to patients ballooned to $104 million, when 4 years ago it was projected to cost only $2.6 million. Some of these taxpayer funds may have even ended up in the hands of a Somalian terrorist group. Scary stuff. When CMS became aware of the housing program situation, Minnesota insisted it could clean up its own mess. A few months ago, it admitted it could not. So we stepped in to shut down the fraud-infested housing initiative. Today, we're taking action on more than a dozen other programs, which I've outlined in the post below. Our message to Walz is clear. Either fix this in 60 days or start looking under your couch for spare change, because we are done footing the bill for your incompetence. This administration will never stop fighting to protect the vulnerable Americans who rely on these programs and the taxpayers who fund them. We're going to crush and abuse.
And yesterday we saw Tim Walz complaining that people are driving past his house calling him retarded and that such language can lead to violence. Scott Adams said apparently Walz doesn't think calling Republicans fascists can lead to violence, but calling Walz a retard can. You'd have to be a total retard to believe that. Elon said Walz looks like the clown emoji. And viewer discretion is advised. 10 are dead as a car is driven into a Christmas market preparation crowds in France's Guadeloupe. Legacy media is silent. Elon said again. And this happened in the United States. Gary Edwards was charged with second-degree assault for stabbing a man in Portland near a light rail stop on July 8th. However, he was found not guilty of the crime on October 31st after the jury learned the victim was using racial slurs in the aftermath of the altercation. Elon said, "Whoa." And in San Francisco, Gary Tan says Asian American elders are being assaulted and murdered, and their killers are not being held to account. This is an outrage. Judges who hold their own virtue signaling higher than the lives of the elders of our community should resign now. And Elon reposted that. And SMX said nobody would have thought that this kid wearing a football helmet and an orange jumpsuit would go on to save free speech and make the future of humanity super exciting. Elon said improv astronaut. And that is the dictation button on your iPhone. And Justin Bieber says if I hit this dictation button after sending a text and it beeps and stops my music one more time, I'm going to find everyone at Apple and put them in a rear naked chokehold. Even if I turn off dictation, I somehow hit the voice note thing. The send button should not have multiple functions in the same spot. And Elon quoted that with some flames. A National Design Studio is hiring software engineers and product designers to make government experiences satisfying and inspired. You can inquire within at ND Studio. And Michael Dell says, my wife and I are gifting $6.25 billion to 25 million children 10 and under from zip codes where the median income is less than $150,000 to seed their Invest America accounts. Elon said, cool. And the world must know the South African government currently has more than 145 active race-based laws, many of which are explicitly discriminatory. Of the 324 race-based laws that have been passed since 1910 by the South African Parliament, 38% of them have been introduced since the ANC came to power in 1994. And Elon reposted that. And X Freeze sort of recaps the SpaceX story, saying that the claim of $800 billion is false and that SpaceX has been cash flow positive for many years and isn't out hunting for cash. Instead, it runs twice yearly stock buybacks to give employees and investors liquidity, while valuation steps up naturally with real progress on Starship, Starlink, and global direct-to-cell spectrum. Elon said exactly. And Grok, imagine Elon's picking up a little lion with all of his billionaire buddies. So, that is everything that Elon said today. That was a long one. I just recapped the SpaceX story, but with the EU, lots going on. Elon posted about that 67 times today in total, and it sounds like there's some guys who are working in government in the US who are cooking something up to sort of retaliate against the EU and finding ways in which they can stop censoring Americans from foreign lands. America is also ending visas for people who work in content moderation. And we also learned more about how Minnesota stole about $1 billion in Medicaid. So that's all for today. And if you guys want early access to these videos, you can gain access by joining this channel as a member. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Hey guys, just realized I forgot to go over these 5 political posts. They were in a folder that I never even opened while I was recording. Rogan was genuinely stunned by Elon in this clip, talking about fraud in the government, in the US government. John said you need an ID to go to your kid's elementary school to see the Christmas play, so why don't you need an ID to vote? Hunter Ash said that a country without borders is not a country. John Rain said that being far right in 2025 is literally just being totally normal. And a judge ordered the release of sealed Epstein grand jury transcripts. So here's where we are. The Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Trump signed it on November 19th. And the Department of Justice now has until December 19th to release all unclassified records. And the law explicitly states that nothing can be withheld solely because it would cause embarrassment or reputational harm to any public figure. The clock is ticking. 2 weeks until Christmas, 2 weeks until we see what they've been hiding. And Elon reposted that. My apologies for that mistake. I'm off to an event this evening, so I didn't have time to ratify it in a more professional manner. But now, that's everything. See you guys tomorrow.